Hello everyone, I am the Weather Dude. Welcome back, and today, as is the early April tradition, I'm going to give my primary look at the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season. As always, do not forget to like and subscribe, as there will be many weather updates in the future, both in the hurricane season regard as we march closer to the season. Also, it is tornado season, and we're also wrapping up the end of winter season, which surprisingly, and not a lot of storms are still lingering behind. But without further ado, let's get into it. So, for this season, I know we've had La Ninas the past few years, and it's led to some pretty above average hurricane seasons. This year, it's actually going to flip to an El Nino. At least that's what's predicted by NOAA and many other organizations. So, right now, we are actually, and as you'll see and later on in the video, we are in an ENSO neutral right now over that Nino 3-4 region, which I will show you in the Pacific, that kind of determines these ENSO outlooks. And we are under an El Nino watch, which means that there is a 50% chance that an El Nino develops later in 2023. Now, whether it's a strong or a weaker one, I think that's the only thing that's a little, that people aren't like, the organizations aren't too sure about yet, like NOAA, I know, and this is like from the Australian Bureau of Meteorology. You're going to see a little bit conflicting opinion here, but the general consensus is that we could see a shift to El Nino, which could be good news for the East in the winter, for next winter, just saying, but again, that's like a year out or less than a year out, so I'm not going to quite touch on that yet. So here's the Nino 3-4 index, as I just talked about. Let's actually zoom in a little bit here. And you can see we are hovering around ENSO neutral, as you can see coming out of the La Nina from January and February. We've been marching steadily upward since then. Overall, obviously it's not going to be up all the time, but we were marching, overall in a steady upward direction. So negative 0.1 is where we're at right now. Anywhere basically, if you're less than positive 0.5 and then like higher than negative 0.5, that's like your ENSO neutral area. So we pretty much, now it's not like the second it gets there is when we, it's like the second we touch over here is when we get to ENSO neutral. It does have to stay there for a little bit, a good period of time. And it's been there for about a month. So I'd say, and it's looking like it's going to stay there. So I think we can say with confidence that we're like in an ENSO neutral pattern now. So here is the outlook I was talking about, and wow. I mean, this is one of the more bullish outlooks I've seen, but we're also going to look at, so this is from the Australian Bureau of Meteorology. We're also going to look at NOAA and what their outlook says. So right now, all right, here is our current value, right around zero, kind of like what we just saw in tropical targets, and then ENSO neutral, right? We're pretty much hovering around zero, but the consensus is that, we could hit like that El Nino threshold by May. I mean, that's a pretty steady climb. And there's not like outliers. Like the models are, I mean, these ensemble models, this batch at least, is pretty well, they're pretty well in agreement. All right. And even by July and August, I mean, we're like in a strong El Nino. Like we're up in this territory. Like usually like 0.5 to 1 above average is like the weak to moderate El Nino, maybe 1 to 1.5, something like that, moderate to high. And then like over 1.5 is like that strong El Nino. And we're there. I mean, by August, September, I mean, we're in that strong territory. So that's a pretty bullish outlook, and we'll see if it holds true. Certainly not ruled out. But if we look at the sea surface temperatures, I mean, are we getting off to a hefty start this year? All right, look at the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, we're talking 2, even over 3, and even over 4 degrees Celsius above average. Several degrees Fahrenheit above average in these waters here. Like, we're talking water temperatures that are supposed to be like kind of like in the low mid 70s, but some areas in the Gulf of Mexico are already approaching 80, and the Gulf Stream is already at 80, as you'll see in a little bit. So these waters are already getting warmed up. So we are in that ENSO neutral pattern. Again, I do expect it to shift. The Caribbean and Northern Caribbean is about a degree Celsius-ish above average, but most of the central and eastern part of the Caribbean is remaining about average for right now. And we're not really going to look towards Africa because hurricane season hasn't even started yet, and even when it does start, we still won't usually see activity closer to home. So we'll eventually in the next couple of months we'll start looking towards Africa. But for now, again, hurricane season hasn't even started yet, so we're just going to stay closer to home here. But by the Bahamas, 1 to 2 degrees Celsius above average. So these waters are looking pretty good for development, at least from the sea surface temperature anomaly standpoint. So in terms of the actual temperatures, of course, they're not going to be high. It's only April, but they're still pretty far above average. And if it stays that way in the next couple of months, as it could, right, I think we can see temperatures really starting to warm up. So So here's like the current right here. So you can see kind of the Gulf Stream kind of starts. It does kind of, there's always like that warm spot I always talk about in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. So then it kind of flows like this. You can see the Gulf Stream right here. So anywhere in the yellow that's at least 25 degrees Celsius, aka about 77, maybe closer to 78, around that area, 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, typically, 77, even 75 if the other conditions like the wind shear and the dryer line up just right. Even at 75, you can have like tropical storms develop. But really, it's like upper 70s and especially like at least low 80s is when you start to get that tropical development, especially if you want hurricanes. So it's at least, I mean, the southern half of the Gulf of Mexico is definitely over 77. And I'm not sure how good the colors are on whatever screen you're watching on, but even like not just a shade of yellow, but a shade, deeper than that, maybe it's a little bit of lighter orange in here indicates that closer to 80. And then about 80 in that orange, that third shade of orange right here. And you can see that second shade of orange kind of goes up into the Gulf Stream. That's where temperatures are about 80, as you'll see on another map. Northern Caribbean, they're at about 80. They usually stay closer to 80 even during the wintertime. They might drop to the upper 70s. And then on the Pacific side, we're exceeding 80 as the season does start a little bit earlier, a couple weeks, typically earlier on the Pacific side. All right, so here's how the sea surface temperatures have changed over the last 7 days. And woof, in the last week, I mean, 1 to 3. I mean, you might think, okay, well, what's the big deal, right? Well, sea surface temperatures changing 1 to 3 degrees Celsius in just a week, I mean, pretty significant. That's a pretty good warm up. And we've definitely seen that, especially across the eastern and northern Gulf of Mexico. Caribbean, for the most part, it stayed about the same. Some areas in the central part maybe gone up about a half a degree Celsius. And in the kind of like western Atlantic area, overall, we've been going up about a degree and a half Celsius in the last week. So pretty steady increase. Now, if we look here on windy.com, you can see the sea surface temperature map. So here's the wave map, all right? 20-foot waves off that low pressure. I might touch on that in a little bit. Let's do the sea surface temperatures. I mean, look at this. See that central spot, kind of like that current? So basically, that's why like the Gulf Stream can get so warm at times because it's feeding off of the Caribbean. You can see this, it's connected. This current goes all the way up here through the northern Caribbean. This is very warm territory. Then it kind of carries that into the Gulf of Mexico, kind of like in that center spot where it usually gets pretty warm, and then around into the Gulf Stream. All right, and that's kind of where that low pressure is sitting right now. So it's like feeding off that tropical moisture from the Gulf Stream. But yes, part of the Gulf of Mexico is already 81 Fahrenheit. I mean, if this season wasn't an El Nino season, I'd be a lot more worried. But since it's looking like that, then now I want to put something out there right now. Just because we are expecting an El Nino season does not mean that activity will just be none. Not at all. All right, there could still be a landfalling hurricane that could impact your community. So always got to stay prepared. But it is relieving to see a below average hurricane season this year. I mean, I do like tracking hurricanes, but when it harms human life, it's kind of hard to cheer them on. It's very hard to cheer them on. But on the Pacific side, right, 85, 86, really, really warm sea surface temperatures over there. But even in the Caribbean, 81, about the same. Again, because the Gulf of Mexico is getting the same. The current is carrying from here to here. So 81, not bad. Even in the northern Gulf, I mean, 75, 76, even. And when you get closer to the coast, that's where it's a little bit cooler, low 70s. But even by Florida, 78, 79, right? And then, like I said, the Gulf Stream right here, 79, 80. Even all the way out to the Carolinas, it's still 75. So, case in point here, sea surface temperatures are already looking on the warmer side. And unless we get like a bunch of cold fronts to come through and get some cooler air and, maybe some lack of sunshine to not warm the water up as much, unless that happens, I really, these waters are only going to get warmer over time. Now, dry air, it's still pretty significant. Now, of course, this is like expected for this time of year. All right, you might be like, oh, a lot of dry air, dead season. I mean, this is expected. But honestly, considering it's April, this is actually less dry air than normal. I mean, now, part of it is kind of blocked off because there's clouds and usually that kind of overlays on top of that. But still, I mean, not much dry air out in here. Even the Gulf of Mexico is it's kind of like broken up. But still, the Caribbean is pretty, protected, and a lot of Saharan air right there. But by the Lesser Antilles there, on the island chain, honestly, it's looking, pretty lacking in terms of the dry air. And there is convection, but it's kind of pushed south of that 10-degree north latitude line, right? Because the dry air kind of keeps it south, And over time through like August, September, you'll see convection coming off further north, kind of in this direction. Now, let's take a look at the vorticity map. Okay, the vorticity map, honestly, looking kind of lack, and again, it's April, but just to get like a primary look, so that way maybe over the next few videos when, hurricane season starts coming, it gets closer and closer, these maps will get a little bit more active. But because that low pressure system right now in the 850 millibar vorticity signature, you can see it's pretty active here, right? There's a lot of, little bit of thunderstorm activity, right? But other than that, not really looking like much that could really develop. And it's not circular, may I add. It's kind of elongated, stretched out. Of course it is. It's not a tropical system, but it is an area of low pressure, right? And I'll give it a refresh, even though I just did. Okay, but here is the oceanic heat content, and you can see starting to build up, but again, nothing significant. I mean, we're talking values going up to 150, but right now, seeing values stuck at around 50, maybe 55. Okay, so we still got a long way to go, but of course, again, it's April. But you can kind of see that heat kind of like starting to spill a little bit into the Gulf of Mexico. So if a low pressure were to move over the Gulf of Mexico, it may not develop, but it could become maybe an invest, maybe a tropical depression. If the other conditions, remember, the wind shear and dry air don't have to be like all the way low. It's not like it's going to form to a hurricane, but an invest, or maybe if like a stationary front comes through, some can spin off of that. And if there's a lot of heat content, or if there's at least some that starts to build in this area, that low pressure could feed off of those warm, because remember, the sea surface temperatures have to be warm, at the surface and below. So it can feed off that warm water, and if I change color here, the wind flow could feed off that warm water, really bring the moisture into the southeast. So even if it's not something like, super, tropical, it can still bring a lot of moisture and maybe some higher waves and cause some issues. So case in point here, ocean heat is starting to build. I would say this looks about normal for this kind of map this time of year. All right, Caribbean's always got a little bit of heat left over, and it's starting to spill into the Gulf of Mexico as we start to warm up. All right, wind shear maps, looking high, again, perfectly normal. Very high, in fact. Not values over 60, 70, 80, 90 knots, even 100 off the coast, off the East Coast. I would say a spot with some of the lowest shear, kind of in here, little pockets. The Caribbean, not too bad, but I mean, 40, 50 is still pretty high. So any kind of disturbance that tries to go through that will just absolutely wreck. Not that there really will be any convection this time of year. Wind shear values up about 5-10 knots over the past 24 hours. That's what I like about this map. You can see how it's changed over the last 24 hours. So values have only gone up. All right. And it's decreased over land, but of course, tropical systems cannot form over land, so that doesn't really matter. So let's take a look. I know it's April, but let's take a look at where they usually form in June. And I would even count this for May as well, because this kind of happens during like late May. Usually activity will form in the Caribbean, all right, and kind of track through the Gulf of Mexico, the Eastern Gulf being like the spot that gets the most, quote unquote, most activity. Anywhere like in this blue zone is where we typically get a good amount of tropical activity, with the most, of course, being in here. And they can't even track off the East Coast. I've seen it here many times. It's just a map of what we usually see for June. If we look at the map right here, again, here is, let me change my color again. Here is May 10th. Of course, look how low that is in terms of tropical activity, and we're still a month away from that. So you can count on it being even lower right now. But eventually, as we head to the beginning of hurricane season, June 1st, eventually activity will start bumping up, and then you've got some activity by June, July, and then once you hit August, it just spirals up. Again, in a typical season. The peak in terms of on the day is September 10th, but that doesn't mean you're going to have 10 hurricanes on September 10th. Climatologically, that's just the day we usually get the most. I would say anywhere between August 20th and October 1st is when you see the most activity, right? Kind of like both sides surrounding that peak evenly, I would say is where, so between, August 20th, really August 15th and October 1st or October 15th is where we typically see the most activity in a hurricane season. And we've seen plenty before, and we've seen plenty after. Right? But again, that's just typically when it gets busy. Now, let's take a look at what we got out there right now. I've been talking about a lot what could happen normally, but let's take a look at what's out there right now. See if there's anything that could become, maybe if it's even not tropical, could maybe turn into something of a bit of a problem. Little area of rotation, you can kind of see it in the Gulf of Mexico right there. Looks pretty cool. a little low pressure area. Oh, I forgot to change my color. A little low pressure area right here. Kind of got some, dry air getting sucked into it, but it's got some moisture along with it that could bring to the southeast, could cause a bit of an issue. All right, you can see kind of like this moisture coming from the Gulf of Mexico. So this is kind of like Thursday night, so keep an eye on that there if you live in Florida or Georgia. Kind of like a little band of moisture. It doesn't necessarily mean rain, but increased moisture could even lead to some thunderstorm activity, who knows. And then Sunday, we got a little batch moving over Florida. A little bit more of an organized, maybe more like a little dip in the jet stream, a little frontal boundary kind of sweeping across. So Monday, a little bit increased moisture presence. And that's good for Florida because this is their dry season right now. So that's definitely a welcome sight. So we can actually switch over to the precip and see what we got going on. Yeah, so you can see some increased moisture presence on Monday over Florida. Even before that, like I was mentioning before, later Thursday into Friday, coming back on Monday. And that's pretty much it. I mean, nothing. Got a little low pressure here. I mean, this is like 16 days out, but a little low pressure dropping over here in the southeast. But again, it's late April. I mean, stuff has like tropical systems have formed at this time of year. But I would really start taking these storms seriously for the most part. I would like start looking towards May. I think May is when we can start to see, especially middle of the month and later, we can start to see some more activity forming there. All right, so let's look at. So I did actually save this for the end of the video, kind of created my own forecast, and I'll be most likely updating this every video unless I feel like nothing's really changed. So since no other really like organizations that I know of, if you do know of any, feel free to put it in the comments, have released, I just put the average and in my forecast, and as I see the others come out, I will of course add them to the table. But here we go. So the average, of course, as you know, I believe it was a couple years ago. It feels like a long time ago. But they did raise the average. It used to be 12 tropical storms. I probably should add this first. So this is tropical storms right here. This is hurricanes right here. And then the third column is major hurricanes. Probably should have added that to the key. But it used to be 12 tropical storms, 6 hurricanes, and 3 majors in an average season, of course, because hurricane seasons have been progressively getting more active. The averages have kind of gone up to 14 tropical storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. And honestly, my forecast right now, judging on what I've seen, of course, wind shear and dry air are high, as normal for this time of year. But I would have put below average numbers, and of course, El Nino does lead to a weaker season. But because of those, concerningly high sea surface temperature anomalies, that kind of led me to keep the forecast around average, maybe slightly below, right? So tropical storms, I think, will still be able to form. I think we'll get about an average number. Hurricanes, I think, is what's going to be slightly below average, maybe 5 to 7. And then major hurricanes, we always seem to get at least like 1 or 2. But I think 2 or 3, especially in those more active months, could come about this season. But of course, expect this to change. I'll probably be updating this through like the early part of hurricane season, maybe for the next couple of months. So stay tuned. I hope to do maybe some more of these in the future. Thank you guys for watching. I am the Weather Dude signing off. Till next time, I'll catch you guys in the next video.